The American Civil War, the struggle that defined a nation. The American Civil War remains the most significant and transformative event in the history of the United States. Fought between 1861 and 1865, it pitted the northern states, the Union, against the southern states, the Confederacy, who had seceded to form their own nation. At its core, the war was a clash over the institution of slavery, states' rights, and the very definition of the American Union. It was a brutal conflict that claimed the lives of over 600,000 soldiers and reshaped the political and social landscape of the country forever. The roots of conflict. The seeds of the Civil War were sown long before 1861. Since the country's inception, there had been an uneasy tension between the North and the South. The North was rapidly industrializing, developing a diverse economy, and becoming increasingly abolitionist. In contrast, the Southern economy was heavily dependent on king cotton and the labor of enslaved African Americans. The debate over whether new territories entering the Union should allow slavery became a flashpoint. Laws like the Missouri Compromise, 1820, and the Compromise of 1850 were temporary bandages on a gaping wound. The publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe and the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision further polarized the nation, making a peaceful resolution increasingly unlikely. The election of 1860 and secession. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 served as the final catalyst. Lincoln, a member of the newly formed Republican Party, was staunchly opposed to the expansion of slavery. Even though he promised not to interfere with slavery where it already existed, Southern leaders viewed his victory as a death knell for their way of life. Shortly after his inauguration, South Carolina seceded from the Union, followed by 10 other states, forming the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as their president. The war begins. The war formally began on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces fired upon Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. The initial optimism on both sides, the belief that the war would be short, was shattered by the First Battle of Bull Run. It became clear that this would be a long, bloody, and industrial-scale struggle. Key turning points. The Emancipation Proclamation, 1863. Lincoln's executive order changed the moral objective of the war. By declaring slaves in Confederate territory to be free, it transformed the war from a struggle to preserve the Union into a crusade for human liberty. The Battle of Gettysburg, 1863. Often called the high water mark of the Confederacy, this three-day battle in Pennsylvania was a decisive Union victory. It halted General Robert E. Lee's invasion of the North and shifted the momentum irrevocably toward the Union. The Fall of Vicksburg, 1863. Simultaneously, General Ulysses S. Grant secured Vicksburg, giving the Union control of the Mississippi River and effectively splitting the Confederacy in two. The final stretch and Appomattox. By 1864, Ulysses S. Grant had been appointed commander of all Union armies. He engaged in a war of attrition, putting relentless pressure on General Lee's forces in Virginia. Meanwhile, General William T. Sherman led his march to the sea, destroying Confederate infrastructure and morale across Georgia.
On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered his Army of Northern Virginia to General Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse. While smaller skirmishes continued for weeks, the war was effectively over. The legacy of the war. The aftermath of the war was profound. The Union was preserved, and the 13th Amendment was passed, officially abolishing slavery in the United States. However, the nation was left devastated. The Reconstruction Era, 1865 to 1877, followed, a difficult period of rebuilding and attempting to integrate 4 million newly freed slaves into a society that was still deeply hostile toward them. The Civil War established the federal government's supremacy over the states and fundamentally changed the American identity. It remains a complex chapter, marked by immense heroism, tragic suffering, and the long, painful road towards civil rights that continues to influence American politics to this day. The aftermath.
the era of Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877. The challenges of a fractured nation. With the guns finally silent in 1865, the United States faced an unprecedented challenge. The South was in ruins, its cities destroyed, its economy shattered, and its social structure completely upended. 4 million formerly enslaved people were now free, but they were homeless, penniless, and lacked education or legal rights. The question was not just how to rebuild the South, but how to reintegrate the seceded states into the Union and what the status of the freedmen would be. Lincoln's assassination and Johnson's struggle.
Only days after the war ended, tragedy struck. President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. His successor, Andrew Johnson, a Southern Democrat, held views that were fundamentally at odds with the Republican-led Congress. Johnson wanted a lenient policy toward the former Confederate states, which angered many in the North who felt that the South needed to be held accountable for the war. The 3 constitutional amendments. During this period, the U.S. Constitution was fundamentally rewritten to reflect the outcome of the war. 13th Amendment, 1865, abolished slavery throughout the United States. 14th Amendment, 1868, granted citizenship and equal protection of the laws to all persons born or naturalized in the U.S. This was intended to protect the rights of freedmen. 15th Amendment, 1870, prohibited the denial of the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude.
The rise of Jim Crow and failure of Reconstruction. Despite these legal victories, the reality on the ground was brutal. Many southern states enacted black codes, restrictive laws designed to limit the freedom of African Americans and force them back into labor situations similar to slavery. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan, KKK, emerged, using terrorism, violence, and intimidation to suppress the voting rights of black citizens and to restore white supremacy. As the North grew weary of the long, expensive, and politically volatile occupation of the South, the federal government's commitment to protecting the rights of freedmen began to fade. The Compromise of 1877. The end of Reconstruction came with the controversial presidential election of 1876. To resolve a disputed election, a compromise was reached in 1877. Republican Rutherford B. Hayes would become president, provided that he withdrew all remaining federal troops from the South. The withdrawal of troops effectively signaled the end of Reconstruction. Without federal protection, the South fell back into a system of segregation and racial disenfranchisement that would last for nearly another century, until the civil rights movement of the 1960s. The Industrial Revolution and American expansion. While the South struggled to redefine itself, the North and the West entered a period of explosive growth. The late 19th century, known as the Gilded Age, saw the rise of industrial titans like Andrew Carnegie, steel, and John D. Rockefeller, oil. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 connected the east and west coasts, accelerating westward expansion, the displacement of Native American tribes, and the rise of the United States as a global industrial power. Summary of the legacy. The post-war era proved that winning a war was easier than winning the peace. The Civil War had abolished slavery, but it had not fully dismantled the structures of racial inequality. The failures of the Reconstruction era left a wound in American society that would take generations to heal. However, the period also established the principle that the United States was a single, indivisible nation, a United States rather than a loose collection of states, which paved the way for its emergence as a dominant force in the 20th century.